What do you do when the love you built your world around turns into a web of lies? Sarah and David's story is about to reveal the devastating truth behind the facade of their marriage. As Sarah walked into the living room, her confident smile wavered. She held a bouquet of white lilies, their delicate scent filling the air. But what once symbolized love now reeked of something darker. Her eyes were drawn to the wall where their wedding photo used to hang, a photo that had been replaced by a cold, empty space. David was seated on the couch, calm and composed. But his gaze? It was sharp, unyielding. He looked up at her, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Something missing, Sarah?" he asked, the tone so steady it sent a chill down her spine. Sarah froze, the color draining from her face. Her hands trembled as she struggled to answer the question she knew was coming. "But before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update." All right, back to the story. The room had once been filled with laughter and warmth, but now it felt cold and heavy. David sat with an old book in his hands, a gift from Sarah on his birthday. Normally, the book would have taken him to another world, but today, the words were just ink on a page. His mind was too tangled in the reality of their fractured relationship. The scent of the lilies, now resting on the table, hung in the air like a cruel reminder. David's gaze flicked to the wooden clock on the Sarah's polished exterior was beginning to crack. She glanced back at the table, where the bouquet of white lilies sat like a silent witness to the tension in the room. For a fleeting moment, she looked at David, hoping to find some trace of the warmth they used to share. But his expression was unreadable, his calmness unnerving. "I don't know what you mean," Sarah said, her voice wavering. She moved toward the bookshelf, lightly tracing her fingers along the dusty surface, pretending to be at ease. But when her eyes fell on the spot where their wedding photo used to be, her movements stilled. "Where's our wedding photo?" she asked, her tone cautious. David looked up slowly, his gaze piercing. "I thought it didn't belong there anymore," he said, each word deliberate. Sarah's brows furrowed. "What do you mean it didn't belong there?" "It's our wedding photo, David. You used to say it was the most important thing in this house." David leaned back on the sofa, his posture relaxed but his voice cutting. "It was important, but now it's just a reminder of what's been lost." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She took a step back, her hands instinctively twisting a lock of her hair, a nervous habit she couldn't hide. "David, I don't understand why you're saying this. We've been through so much together. You can't just take it down without telling me." David's calm demeanor didn't waver. He crossed his arms and leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "Sarah, don't you see it? That empty space on the wall. It's just like the empty space in our relationship." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she gripped the hem of her blouse, trying to hold herself together. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. David's gaze didn't falter. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah. Don't play dumb. You're better than that. Or at least you used to be." Sarah's breathing quickened, and her polished smile vanished entirely. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to deflect the conversation, but David was relentless. He rose from the sofa, his movements deliberate. Walking to the table, he picked up the bouquet of lilies, his fingers brushing over the soft petals. "Do you know what I think about lilies, Sarah?" he asked, his voice calm but chilling. "They're beautiful," she replied, though her voice lacked confidence. "Pure and innocent." David gave a bitter laugh, one that sent shivers down her spine. Exactly. They look perfect on the outside. But what people don't realize is that lilies rot from the inside out. By the time they start to wilt, it's already too late. He placed the bouquet back on the table and turned to face her, his gaze unrelenting. Just like us. The silence between them was suffocating. Sarah's eyes darted to the bowl of keys on the shelf, where the movie tickets still lay. She picked up one, her hands trembling. These tickets, they were for last night? She asked, her voice uneven. David nodded.
Yes.
Who did you go with? No one, he replied simply. It was just me. Sarah's fingers tightened around the ticket. Why didn't you tell me? David's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? He asked, his tone heavy with meaning. Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. What are you talking about? David walked back to the sofa and sat down, his expression unreadable. I've spent months piecing it all together. The late nights, the lies, the perfume that wasn't yours. Do you think I didn't notice? Sarah froze, her hands falling to her sides. David, Don't, he interrupted sharply. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. Sarah's breath hitched. She stepped back, her hands trembling at her sides. David, please, you're misunderstanding. Whatever you think you know, it's not true. David let out a dry, humorless laugh. Not true? Sarah, I've ignored so many signs, convinced myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. She shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. David, I swear, it's not what you think. Whatever you've heard. He interrupted her, his tone sharp and unrelenting. Heard? Sarah, I didn't hear anything. I saw it. Her eyes widened, her polished facade crumbling further. Saw what? David's jaw tightened. Rising from the couch, he walked to the small wooden box on the side table. He lifted it and set it down on the coffee table between them, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Do you know what this is? He asked, his voice calm yet cold. Sarah stared at the box as though it might explode. David, Don't lie. He cut her off, his voice firm. You've done enough of that already. He opened the box, the faint creak of the hinges almost deafening in the stillness. From it, he pulled out a stack of papers and spread them across the table. These, he said, tapping the papers with his finger, are bank statements. Every dinner, every gift, every payment that doesn't align with anything we shared. Fancy restaurants I've never been to. Jewelry I've never seen. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to the papers, scanning them frantically as though hoping to find some way to explain. David reached into the box again, pulling out printed phone records. He laid them beside the bank statements. And this, he continued, his tone icy, is a list of calls. Morning, noon, night, even when I was sitting in the next room. One number, over and over again. Sarah's face turned pale, her hands clenching into fists. David, it's not. It's exactly what it looks like, he said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. Finally, David pulled out the last item in the box, a set of photographs. He placed them on top of the other evidence with deliberate calmness. The pictures showed moments too intimate to be mistaken. Stolen glances, lingering touches, smiles that spoke of something more. Sarah gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. David, please. It's not what it seems. David let out a bitter laugh. Not what it seems. Sarah, do you hear yourself? These aren't just mistakes. They're choices. Choices you made, over and over again. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she reached for the photographs, her hands shaking. David, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. A mistake, he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door or spilling coffee on the carpet. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. She sobbed, her voice cracking as she pleaded. David, I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. Please, we can fix this. David shook his head, his expression one of quiet resolve. You don't fix this, Sarah. You can't patch up a house built on lies. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah collapsed into the chair behind her, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs filled the room, but David remained unmoved. Finally, he broke the silence. I've made my decision, he said, his voice steady. This isn't something I came to lightly, but it's done. I'm leaving. Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with disbelief. No, David, you don't mean that. We can talk this through. We can work it out. He shook his head again, his resolve unshaken. I've already started preparing. My things are packed. The divorce papers are ready. I even filed them this morning. Sarah gasped, clutching her chest as though his words were a physical blow. No, David, please, don't do this. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes. You had the chance to change, he said firmly. Every lie you told, every excuse you made, every time you looked me in the eye and chose to deceive me, you made this inevitable. David straightened, his posture firm, as if each word he spoke cemented his decision. This isn't about anger or revenge anymore, Sarah, he said quietly. It's about freedom. I refuse to live in a house built on lies. I deserve better than this. And honestly, so do you. Sarah's sobs grew louder. Her hands clutched at the photographs, the papers, and finally, the letter David had handed her. Her trembling fingers unfolded the worn paper. As she read his words, her sobs turned into quiet whimpers. Sarah, I loved you with everything I had. I trusted you. I believed in you. We built a life together, a life I thought was unbreakable. But trust is fragile, and you shattered it, piece by piece. The late nights, the excuses, the lies, they didn't just break my heart. They broke the foundation of us. This box isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. I needed to see the truth for what it is, even if it hurts more than I thought possible. You may call it a mistake. I call it a choice you made again and again. Now, I'm making my choice. Goodbye, David. Sarah's hands went limp, the letter slipping from her grasp and fluttering onto the table. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, David, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please don't leave me. David looked at her, his expression softening for a moment, but his resolve remained firm. I can't, Sarah. What we had, it's gone. He reached for his suitcase, the weight of it grounding him in the reality of his decision. Sarah stumbled toward him, clutching his arm. David, don't do this. Please. For better or worse, those were our vows. He gently removed her hand, his voice calm but final. I kept those vows, Sarah, but there's nothing left to fight for. Goodbye. David turned and walked toward the door. The click of the latch as he opened it felt like a final punctuation mark on a chapter of his life. He paused for a brief moment, glancing back at the room that had once been their sanctuary. Now, it felt empty, cold, a shell of what it used to be. Outside, the air was crisp and fresh, the faint scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the fading sunlight. David took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of lightness. For the first time in years, he could breathe freely. He placed his suitcase in the trunk of his car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The steady hum of the car felt reassuring, like a promise of a new beginning. As he drove away, the house grew smaller in his rearview mirror until it was just a distant silhouette against the setting sun. Sarah remained motionless on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. Her hands trembled as she picked up the letter again, rereading it through blurred tears, each word carved deeper into her heart. Her gaze drifted to the empty wall where their wedding photo had once hung. She reached out, her fingers brushing the space as though she could will the memory back into existence. "David," she whispered, her voice hollow, but the silence that followed was deafening. The faint sound of his car pulling away echoed in the distance, leaving behind an unbearable void. On the road, David drove with the windows slightly open, letting the cool evening breeze wash over him. The wildflowers lining the roadside caught his eye, imperfect, their petals bruised by the elements, yet thriving in the most unexpected places. He smiled faintly, feeling a deep sense of clarity. The lies, the heartbreak, the endless nights of doubt. They were all behind him now, left on a road he would never travel again. The horizon stretched out before him, painted in hues of gold and orange. It was a new beginning, a blank canvas. For the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't scare him. It excited him. David gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, his resolve firm. This was his journey now, unburdened by deceit and betrayal. The past was closed, and the future lay ahead, waiting to be written.